For the average human, it is difficult at times to envision the universe as a construct in 4 dimensions. Now a new study has discovered structures in the brain with up to 11 dimensions. This is groundbreaking work that is beginning to reveal the brain's deepest architectural secrets and how the higher spatial geometry plays a part in the grand scheme of things. The Blue Brain project has uncovered a universe of multidimensional geometrical structures and spaces within the networks of the brain. This Swiss research initiative is devoted to building a supercomputer-powered reconstruction of the human brain. If 4D worlds stretch and nearly break our imaginations, worlds with 5, 6, or more dimensions are too complex for most of us to comprehend at all. For most of us, this is the purview of religion and fantasy. But for others, this is where algebraic topology comes in, a branch of mathematics that can describe systems with any number of dimensions. It goes like this. The research that was published in Frontiers in Computational Neuroscience shows that these newly discovered structures arise when a group of neurons forms a clique. Each neuron connects to every other neuron in the group in a very specific way that generates a precise geometric object. The more neurons there are in a clique, the higher the dimension of the geometric object. A dimension is actually just an axis of freedom. Remember that. It is not something you need a Stargate for or any such fantastical science fiction notions. They just are. You just need the intellect to understand them. We found a world that we had never imagined, says neuroscientist Henry Markram, director of Blue Brain Project and professor at the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland. There are tens of millions of these objects even in a small speck of the brain, up through 7 dimensions. In some networks, we even found structures with up to 11 dimensions. Human brains are estimated to have a whopping 86 billion neurons, with multiple connections from each cell webbing in every possible direction, forming the vast cellular network that somehow makes us capable of thought and consciousness. How the form and structure of a network determine its function is not well understood phenomena. Specifically, for neural networks, we lack a unifying framework to unambiguously describe the emergent behavior of the network in terms of its underlying structure. Neither graph theory nor global networks dynamics can provide the solutions we need and crave. Up to now, all formal topological analyses have overlooked the direction of information flow, since they analyzed only indirect graphs. Now there is a new and much broader discipline. The researchers at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Geneva, Switzerland describe their intentions. We developed a mathematical framework to analyze both the structural and the functional topology of the network, integrating local and global descriptions, enabling us to establish a clear relationship between them. We represent a network as a directed graph, with neurons as the vertices and the synaptic connections directed from pre to postsynaptic neurons as the edges, which can be analyzed using elementary tools from algebraic topology. The structural graph contains all synaptic connections, while a functional graph is a subgraph of the structural graph containing only those connections that are active within a specific time bin, i.e., in which postsynaptic neuron fires within a short time of a presynaptic spike. The response to a stimulus can then be represented and studied as a time series of functional graphs. It has been put forth that this may explain why it has been so hard to understand the brain. Here are a few selected quotes from the research abstract. The mathematics usually applied to study networks cannot detect the high-dimensional structures and spaces that we now see clearly. Algebraic topology is like a telescope and microscope at the same time. It can zoom into networks to find hidden structures, the trees in the forest, and see the empty spaces, the clearings, all at the same time, explains Hess. The appearance of high-dimensional cavities when the brain is processing information means that the neurons in the network react to stimuli in an extremely organized manner, says Levi. It is as if the brain reacts to a stimulus by building then raising a tower of multidimensional blocks, starting with rods, 1D, then planks, 2D, then cubes, 3D, and then more complex geometries with 4D, 5D, etc. the progression of activity through the brain resembles a multidimensional sandcastle that materializes out of the sand and then disintegrates. When we simulated microcircuit activity in response to sensory stimuli, we observed that pairwise correlations in neuronal activity increased with the number and dimension of the directed cliques to which a pair of neurons belongs, indicating that the hierarchical structure of the network shapes a hierarchy of correlated activity. In fact, we found a hierarchy of correlated activity between neurons even within a single directed clique. During activity, many more high-dimensional directed cliques formed than would be expected from the number of active connections, further suggesting that correlated activity tends to bind neurons into high-dimensional active cliques. The question now is, what do these multidimensional sand castles do? With what frequency and complexity do they arise? Are there minds that can abstract beyond the 11 dimensions they alluded to in this research? What is the average number of sand castle dimensions most people have? Is more sand castles better and more conducive to complex thoughts? Is there a minimum for consciousness? As more and more of this kind of new vision to see the impossible comes available, we must have the perspective that we are just beginning our journey of understanding the universe. Our minds are the most complex and most purely unknown construct we are aware of. To claim to know all the abilities our brain has is folly. Our consciousness and thus our potential is limitless. As we learn more and more about how consciousness plays a part in everything, we must expand our idea of what is possible. These mental neural abstractions are very interesting for many diverse reasons. It shows how little of our own experiential essence we completely do not understand. That we are dimly even aware of it. We do not even know the right questions to ask, let alone how to interpret any answers we may fabricate. In a previous article, Can Hyperdimensional Alien Life Forms Exist in Our Third-Dimensional Reality? I wrote about the possibility of higher dimension alien life being present in our four-dimensional universe. I hypothesized about how 11-dimensional creatures would manifest and influence us. I propose a hypothetical situation in which we, us, our consciousness in these new topological neural abstractions is just that. These new dimensions of thought are their four-dimensional fractional representation in our space-time. The fractional representations that I discussed are you. Your consciousness is their fractional representation here in our subset of reality. Each individual will have a different inherent understanding of this relationship. Each to their own ability and intellect. Novel clothes for the emperor indeed.